Hey everyone, and welcome back. Today, we're going to be diving into a world that's, well, it's pretty exhilarating, but honestly kind of unnerving too.
Yeah.
We're talking virtual
I
reality,
are. Yeah.
but we're going way beyond, like gaming and all the typical stuff you hear about with VR.
Yeah.
We're going to explore the potential for VR to be something way bigger, something we maybe need to be a little cautious about.
Yeah. What's really fascinating to me is how quickly VR is evolving, you know? We've gone from those like clunky, awkward headsets
Yeah.
to these experiences that feel so real. And it all happened in just a few years. It kind of blows my mind how immersive it's become, you know? And it really makes you think,
Right.
how far can this actually go?
And that's what we're going to be unpacking today. We've been looking at this episode of Alternative World.
Oh, yeah, I saw that one.
And it dives into this idea of a VR prison. And I thought that was interesting.
It is.
So could VR, with all of its potential, with all its appeal, could it actually become a trap? Like something that we willingly just walk into? A place that we actually start to prefer over real life?
That's a great question.
Yeah.
It really gets at like the heart of our relationship with technology.
Totally.
And think about it. We've already seen how social media can be addictive.
Oh, yeah?
How it kind of taps into that human desire for connection.
That need for validation.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
So then you imagine VR taking that to a whole other level, offering these entire worlds that are built to cater to our every whim. I mean, it's exciting, but it's also a little terrifying, don't you think?
Absolutely. And the episode starts off by acknowledging all the amazing things that are already happening with VR, in gaming and therapy, even how it helped people stay connected during the pandemic.
Yeah, I mean, it was a lifeline for a lot of people during that time.
But then it takes this turn and it asks this, what if? What if the very things that make VR so attractive are also the things that could lead to its downfall?
That's a good point. The episode really focuses on this concept of a VR prison. And I think it's important to make a distinction here. We're not talking about like a physical prison, with bars and walls.
Right.
It's more about a mental and emotional entrapment.
Okay.
It's about like voluntarily surrendering to a digital world, a world that just feels more rewarding, more fulfilling, maybe even less complicated than real life.
They actually paint this vivid picture in the episode. They talk about stepping into a VR world that's basically your own utopia.
Your ideal environment.
Exactly. With engaging avatars that are emotionally intelligent.
Oh, yeah.
Maybe even relationships that are always fulfilling.
Yeah.
It makes you wonder, like, why would you even bother with the complexities of real life when you can have all that?
It's the ultimate escape fantasy taken to like the nth degree.
Uh-huh.
And it works because it taps into those basic human desires, the desire for pleasure, for comfort, for control.
Yeah.
VR has the potential to offer all of that and maybe even surpass what we can experience in the physical world.
It's kind of scary to think about, actually.
Yeah.
So what they're saying in the episode is that as VR becomes more and more advanced, that pull, that desire to escape into these perfect little digital worlds, it could become almost irresistible for some people, I mean.
Right. For some people.
That's a scary thought.
It is a scary thought, yeah. And it brings us to this bigger picture.
Okay.
What would be the consequences of such a huge shift, Like, imagine if you had a society where a large part of the population was spending most of their time in VR instead of engaging with the physical world. What happens to our sense of reality then? Our social skills?
Or physical health.
Exactly. These are the questions that the episode is wrestling with.
And they really get into the specifics of those consequences.
Yeah.
One that really stood out to me was the distortion of time perception in VR. Like you could spend hours in there.
Oh, yeah.
But it feels like minutes.
Happens to me all the time.
Right. And then snapping back to reality could be really disorienting.
Yeah.
What kind of impact do you think that kind of disconnect could have on us?
I think it could have a huge impact on our lives. It could affect our work, our relationships, even our ability to function just in everyday life. If our sense of time is constantly being warped by VR, it's not hard to imagine people struggling to keep up with deadlines, or to show up for appointments, or even to just stick to a schedule.
That makes a lot of sense. And then there's the potential impact on social skills. The episode argues that those nuances of real-world interactions, like body language and empathy, those could start to fade.
Right.
Because we're so used to these predictable, programmed responses from avatars.
Mm.
So basically, we'd be trading the richness and the complexity of real human connection
Right.
for this simulated version of it.
That's exactly the point they make. It's
Yeah.
like we're choosing comfort. You know, we're choosing this world where everything is designed to just please us and validate us. But in doing that, we might be sacrificing genuine human connection.
And that makes you wonder, what's the cost of that?
What is the cost of that trade-off?
Yeah.
It's a good question.
And it's something we all need to be thinking about because this technology is only becoming more widespread.
Absolutely.
And they also bring up some concerns about how VR could potentially exacerbate existing social and economic disparities. What do you think about that?
Yeah, it's a crucial point.
Okay.
Think about it. If premium VR experiences become like a luxury good,
Right.
then the people who can afford it might just retreat further into these exclusive digital worlds,
Yeah.
leaving everybody else behind. I mean, it's not a stretch to imagine virtual gated communities that mirror the inequalities that we see in the real world
Right.
and maybe even make them worse.
Yeah, that's a chilling thought, especially when they make that comparison to real-world segregation.
Right.
They're suggesting that we could see the same thing happen in virtual spaces with, like, premium VR worlds for the wealthy, and then these lower-quality experiences for everybody else. Do you think they're right?
I mean, it's definitely possible. It raises all these questions about access and opportunity and even basic human rights. In a world that's dominated by VR, like, what happens to the people who are left out?
Yeah.
If all the essential services,
Education,
healthcare,
even just social interaction.
right. If all of that becomes more and more reliant on VR, what happens to the people who can't access it?
It's a bleak picture for sure.
It is.
But I appreciate that the episode even brings these issues up. It feels like a conversation that we need to be having now.
Absolutely.
Before these technologies become so embedded in our lives that we can't really turn back.
Yeah, I agree.
And this leads to another aspect of the whole VR prison concept.
Okay.
The potential for surveillance and manipulation within these virtual spaces.
Oh, for sure. I mean, think about it. Every action you take,
Everything you say.
every conversation you have, even your emotional responses.
Right. All of that can be tracked and analyzed in VR.
And that data can then be used by companies to shape our experiences in real time.
Oh,
to nudge us towards certain behavior.
certain purchases.
Purchases, even certain beliefs. It's like a whole new level of influence and control.
Right. And it brings up that larger question of autonomy in this digital age. As we become more and more dependent on VR, are we giving up some of our freedom, our ability to think for ourselves and make choices that aren't being influenced by algorithms?
It's a lot to think about.
It is.
But the episode does a good job of connecting these futuristic scenarios to how we're already interacting with technology today.
Right.
It's not just about VR.
Exactly.
It's about how we engage with any technology that has the power to shape our perceptions, our behaviors, our understanding of reality.
I think that's a great point. It's not just about this one technology.
Right.
It's about our relationship with technology as a whole.
And that's really why it's so important to be having these conversations now, you know?
Yeah.
To really think critically about the potential consequences of these technologies, both the good and the bad. We have to be aware of how appealing VR can be.
Right.
But we also have to be cautious of the potential downsides.
You know what's interesting is that the episode doesn't, like, completely reject VR. It's not like they're saying it's all bad.
No, not at all.
It's more like they're pushing us to consider all sides of the issue.
Exactly.
Right.
They want us to look at the whole picture. And they wrap up by asking this really thought-provoking question.
Okay.
As VR gets more and more realistic, is there a point where it blurs the lines between real and simulated experiences to the point where reality itself becomes subjective?
Okay, now that's a tough one.
It is, yeah.
What happens when people start questioning whether their experiences in VR are just as real as their experiences in the physical world?
It's a big question.
Could we actually lose touch with a shared sense of reality, like that common ground that we need to build societies and understand the world around us?
That's exactly what they're getting at.
Yeah.
And they even take it a step further. They say, what if VR gets so advanced that we end up with a society that basically lives in these digital worlds? People just neglecting the physical world altogether, maybe even losing touch with their physical selves.
It's a really interesting idea, but I have to admit it's kind of unsettling too.
Yeah.
Like, imagine whole communities that exist mainly in VR,
Right.
interacting only through avatars, the physical world becoming almost irrelevant.
Yeah.
What would happen to our sense of self then?
To our connection to nature.
To our physical health even?
All of that could be impacted.
It's a lot to consider.
It is. But the episode reminds us that the future of VR isn't set in stone.
Oh, okay.
You know, we have a say in how this technology develops and how we use it.
Okay.
It ends on a cautiously optimistic note. It suggests that VR has enormous potential to really improve our lives.
Right.
But we have to approach it thoughtfully and with a critical eye.
So we've covered a lot of ground here.
We have.
We've talked about the allure of VR, the potential pitfalls, even some pretty mind-bending philosophical stuff.
Yeah.
What are your main takeaways from this deep dive into alternative world?
You know, for me, the biggest thing is that VR is way more than just a new gadget.
Okay.
It's really a reflection of us. It reflects our desires, our fears, our potential as humans.
Yeah.
It's like a mirror that shows us both the best and worst of what we're capable of.
I really like that analogy.
Yeah.
It's a technology that can amplify our empathy, our creativity, our ability to connect with each other.
Absolutely.
But it can also make our anxieties worse, our insecurities, our tendency to isolate ourselves or try to escape from reality.
Exactly. It's a double-edged sword.
Yeah.
And that's why the choices that we make right now are so important. We can't just sit back and be passive observers in this technological revolution that's happening.
Right.
We need to be active participants. We need to shape the future of VR in a way that aligns with our values, with our goals, with the kind of world that we want to live in.
So then what can we do as individuals to make sure that we're using VR in a healthy way, in a balanced way, to make sure we're not letting it become a crutch or an escape from reality?
Well, I think awareness is a good place to start. Just be mindful of how much time you're spending in VR.
Okay.
Set some limits for yourself and make sure that you're not neglecting your real life responsibilities or your relationships with the people around you.
Right.
It's also important to be critical of the content that you're consuming in VR.
Okay.
To question the messages that you're being given.
Yeah.
And to just be aware of the potential for manipulation.
Yeah.
Because it's definitely there.
It's like we need a whole new set of digital literacy skills.
Yeah, I think we do.
Not just for navigating the technical side of VR, but for navigating the ethical and psychological challenges that come along with it.
I completely agree.
What do you think?
I think you're absolutely right. We need to be smart consumers of VR experiences, just like we need to be smart about the information that we get online.
Yeah.
We need to be able to tell the difference between truth and falsehood,
Right.
to recognize bias, and to resist the temptation to just get sucked into those echo chambers and filter bubbles.
Yeah, yeah. You know, the episode really stressed that the key to avoiding the VR prison is using this technology in a very intentional and deliberate way.
Right. Making conscious choices about it.
It's about making choices about how and why we're engaging with VR.
Yeah.
It's about recognizing that it's a tool. It's not like a destination in itself.
It's a means to an end, not the end goal.
Right, right. And remembering that the real world, with all of its imperfections, is still where we live our lives.
It is.
It's where our connections are made. It's where we make a difference.
Right. VR can be a powerful way to enhance reality.
Yeah.
But it should never replace it completely.
I feel like we're kind of standing on the edge of something huge here.
Yeah.
Like a big technological shift that could change how we see what it means to be human.
Oh, yeah.
It's both exciting and kind of terrifying.
Absolutely. It really is. It's like we're looking at this classic example of disruptive innovation.
Okay.
VR has the potential to completely change how we do so many things.
Yeah.
How we work, how we learn, how we connect with each other, even how we understand our own identities.
Right.
It's a big deal. We can't just ignore it, but we also can't let it take over.
So where do we even go from here? What can we actually do, like as individuals, to make sure that we're using VR in a healthy and balanced way?
Right.
And that we're not letting it become a crutch or an escape from reality?
Well, like we talked about before, awareness is key. Just being mindful of how much time you're spending in VR, setting some limits for yourself, and making sure you're not neglecting your real-world responsibilities or relationships.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it sounds like we need to develop a whole new skill set here.
Yeah, I think so.
Not just for figuring out how to use VR.
The technical stuff.
Right, right. But for navigating all the ethical and psychological stuff that comes along with it.
Oh, absolutely. We need to be smart consumers of VR experiences.
Okay.
It's kind of like how we need to be careful about the information we consume online. We have to be able to tell the difference between what's true and what's not, recognize bias, resist the temptation to get sucked into those echo chambers and filter bubbles.
You know, that episode, Alternative World, they really emphasize that the key to avoiding that whole VR prison thing is to be intentional about how we use this technology.
Right. To make deliberate choices about it.
Not just letting it use us.
Exactly. It's about seeing VR as a tool, not as a replacement for real life.
Right, right. And I think that's an important point, remembering that the real world, even with all of its problems,
with all its messiness,
is still where we actually live our lives.
Absolutely.
You know, it's where we build relationships, where we make a difference.
It's where real connections are made. VR can be a way to make those connections stronger, but it should never replace them entirely.
So as we're wrapping up here, I'm curious, what's the one thing you hope people take away from our deep dive into VR?
I hope they come away understanding both the amazing potential of this technology and the huge responsibility that comes with it. You know, VR is powerful. And like anything powerful, it can be used for good or for bad. It's up to us to decide how we're going to use it, both as individuals and as a society.
That's a great way to put it.
Yeah.
I think that sums it up perfectly. We've gone over some pretty complex ideas today.
We have.
But I hope everyone listening feels more empowered than overwhelmed.
I hope so too.
Because the future of VR, it's still being written. And we all have a part in shaping what that future looks like.
Absolutely.
So go out there and explore that digital world. But remember to keep one foot planted firmly in reality.
That's good advice.
I think so.
Yeah. The most meaningful experiences, the strongest connections, they're still out here waiting for us in the real world.
And on that note, we'll leave everyone with a final thought.
Okay.
How can we use the power of VR to create a future that's more fair, more sustainable, more connected, and ultimately more human? Until next time, keep diving deep and keep questioning everything.